It seems that AIDS is all over the newspapers and the news. But when you watch the news and read the paper, do you really get the whole story? What is the difference between fantasy and reality when the news covers AIDS? Find out on AIDS Vision. Welcome to AIDS Vision. I'm your volunteer host, Allison Arngrim. And today on AIDS Vision, we're going to be talking about the media, the print media, the television news, and its approach to covering the subject of AIDS. With me today is Karen Ocamb, who is a journalist, and Nicole Russo, who is the Director of Communications at All Saints, now AIDS Service Center. Previously known as SE, now just ASC, for those of you who read your logos. Welcome to AIDS Vision.
Thank you. Thanks.
Now, Nicole, what is it you do at AIDS Service Center as the communications person?
Actually, I was listening to your tease, and you say AIDS is all over the news. And I'm like, wait, no, it's not. I can't get stories on the news. Well, I'm trying. That's my job, is to get the word out about AIDS and HIV and people living with this disease and the services, which aren't news to the media. But so I just try to get the word out about AIDS Service Center and what we do there and the experience of people living with HIV and AIDS. And I call people like Karen Ocamb and say, come on over, and beg her to come over. So
do you find that difficult, as you said, to get the real story out about services as opposed to what we see on the news?
Yeah, services are not, they're not a big, the media really doesn't care about what we're doing for people with AIDS, basically. I mean, and we've been around for a long time. AIDS has been around for a long time. They've been reporting on AIDS, and they're really looking for something different. Now, I mean, my experience now is that news stories are about with the mainstream media, it's more a sensational story. Like the one that always comes to mind is the syringe bandit. That's a big news story now. But they're looking for something real different. So it's difficult to call them and tell them, oh, this wonderful person is doing this, this, and this, and it's not news. So it's difficult.
Now, you're a journalist. Which papers do you write for? Where have people seen your work?
Well, a number of places, I hope. Most recently, the Gay and Lesbian Times. I write for them quite regularly, and also Frontiers, the Bay Area Reporter, the Lesbian News, Genre. I write for a number of different publications, and sometimes I syndicate, sometimes I write for mainstream publications, such as the Hollywood Reporter and Los Angeles Magazine.
Now, that's something that's come up that I've seen. There seems to be quite a difference between what is considered the gay and lesbian or even the AIDS community press versus what is called the mainstream press, the LA Times, what have you, that the stories are covered more thoroughly, that things like services to people with AIDS are mentioned in the papers that you write for. Why is that? Is there a difficulty in getting the kind of stories that you cover out to the so-called mainstream press?
Well, as Nicole pointed out, unfortunately AIDS has been around for a long time. So what Nicole's job is, or what my job is as a writer, is to, and I hate to put it this way, but to kind of find a different angle, find a way to get the story out to people. That's why there's so many feature stories, because sometimes you can find a compelling personal drama, if you will, a compelling personal story, whether it's uplifting or tragic, or some way to talk about AIDS as it pertains to an individual. The tragedy, the horror, and I bear some responsibility for this, is that the disease of AIDS itself is hardly covered at all. And a lot of that, I feel, is because generalists like myself don't understand and are frightened by being incorrect. Albeit some mainstream people are not afraid of being incorrect. They're incorrect all over the place.
They don't seem to mind at all, really.
Right. But I know that I tend to shy away often from medical and scientific stories revolving around AIDS.
Yeah, but you know, there are the medical reporters at those outlets that can do it, but they're not doing it.
Well,
so,
because
yeah.
they're also generalists,
Yeah.
and they also know that the weight of their word may cause panic or may cause excessive
Well,
hope.
also the medical reporter is not just doing AIDS. Is there an AIDS desk or an AIDS reporter at, say, the LA Times or
No.
any of the TV
No.
stations or any of the papers?
Not to my knowledge, there used to
Yeah.
be.
And I found through working in this area for a while that there are certain reporters that are very well informed and they do follow the disease and what's happening, but they can't do so many stories. You know, I did a story, 2 months ago. I can't do one now. I'll call them up.
We
That's
did
too
AIDS
soon.
last week.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
right.
Do you find you have to sell AIDS? You talked about packaging things in a compelling story that you almost have to market the concept of this needing to be known.
Yes.
Yep.
The short answer is absolutely yes. And I mean, it's
How do you do that?
astounding.
How do you say? I mean, here's a disease that has killed hundreds of thousands of people. It's a terrible thing, and you're having to come up with something exciting for people to watch. I mean, is this something that is killing our friends?
Yeah.
Saying,
Well-
well, what's a great story I can sell? How do you do
Right.
that?
Well, I mean, for instance, women with AIDS, there are a number of different ways to go about doing women with AIDS. Now, you can talk about Russo House, for instance, which is a shelter, I believe it was the first in the country, actually, for women and children with AIDS. Rue and Jewel, who was a board member of APLA, and I believe that Rue is on the Board of Governors, actually, they founded this because there was a need. So you can look at their founding of it. You can look at the women who were there. The woman, Tanya, who the LA Times did a story on her and her search for her 2 children.
Right.
So, you can look at that. But if you do it this month, especially for the LA Times, the mainstream, or frankly, even the gay or lesbian press, they say, we've done that story. What's a different angle to it?
And it's interesting because you bring up the Tanya story, and that was something, too, that I've seen where the media will fixate on what is a great concept to sell a story, and it becomes a made-to-order because this was a woman who had AIDS, was trying to find a home for her children who were not infected. Agencies began to get calls asking for families where a mother or father both were sick and the children were not, who were about to be orphaned. And the reality was that a great number of these families, the children were going to live with aunts or relatives, or the children were infected. And if you said, well, I do have a family that really are looking for a home for their children, but they're HIV positive, they'd say, well, get us ones where the children are negative. And it becomes a casting situation. Do you get a lot of this?
Yeah.
Get me a...
Right. Yeah, I was at APLA for 3 years, and now at the AIDS Service Center, you get calls and you sit. They want, as you were saying earlier, the
gay, blind, Hispanic, teenager, orphan.
And they want them like at 4:30, and they want them to do the interview, and it's not that easy, and they're not that flexible. And you say, well, I can't. How about this? Maybe we can go about it this way. And what about talking to this person and offering them alternatives? But they really sort of get fixated on what they have in their mind and how they want to portray that story.
Regardless of even if there's something
Right.
else that's
Yeah.
going on that month that is actually current. Does this also put pressure on people with AIDS?
However,
However.
that may get filed. In other words, that if you can't do that story just yet, maybe we can pick it up at some other time. I mean, people, and I know you know reporters like this, I can't do that now, but let me file it away and let's see if we can't get to it at some other time. Before we get to this next question, I do want to compliment Nicole and people like Nicole, actually, who just really have done an extraordinary job in educating the mainstream press about where to go for an answer. For instance, if there is an AIDS medical or scientific story, they now know to call somebody at APLA. They now call Dean LaCitra, who will find the expert in that area. It's no longer going to try to find somebody in the mainstream at USC or UCLA or somebody who can answer the question. Now a lot of reporters go directly to a source, somebody who actually has the knowledge and can give accurate knowledge.
Yeah, that's a big part of my job, is referring people to well-informed people, professionals in the whether though it goes back to USC sometimes or UCLA Medical
Right.
School, but they do call an AIDS service organization first, and because they know they can get the good information there.
Which has
is
to help.
very important. Yeah.
Because I think there was a time when it was sort of random. They would call whoever
That's
they
right.
thought had an
Right.
answer,
That's
and a
right.
lot of misinformation got out. I do know from my experience as an actress, when my co-star in Little House on the Prairie went public with his AIDS diagnosis, I got the strangest phone calls from people in the press because they apparently did not know who to call for information,
Yeah,
were
sure.
asking me things I couldn't possibly have known. And I thought, why aren't they calling a doctor or someone? And there seemed to be that, they didn't know where to call, and they would just go randomly. So the idea that there's referral out
Yeah.
there.
And GLAAD has also done an extraordinary job in this. Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation has also done an extraordinary job. And there have been some individuals, such as Harold Fairbanks, who used to do an obituary column for Update. Harold has been a source for so many mainstream reporters who, for instance, are doing their annual issue on people who've died of AIDS this year. And they'll come to Harold because Harold, that's his job. He's sort of the obituary reporter, if you will. So he, again, can provide up-to-date and accurate information.
Doesn't this also put a lot of pressure on some of the people who refer to? I know that I've seen a lot of celebrities put in bizarre positions of being expected to know things, being pressured
Right.
for answers
yeah.
if they're involved with AIDS, and people with AIDS being pressured, like, all right, we got to have an interview with you. We need the person with AIDS on at 5, and here's a person who's trying to deal with their disease and now being put in a position of having to package themselves.
Right, and at events, at special events, you see celebrities. When they're going through that line, the media line, sometimes they don't know much about AIDS and HIV. They're at a fundraiser, they're helping the cause, but they're not well informed about the disease, and you see them put under pressure there at those kind of events. And you do see, the media is looking for their angle, how they want this interview to come off, and so they're putting the person with AIDS, they're sort of trying to mold that person with AIDS, living with AIDS, to fit their questions, and it doesn't always work, and it is pressure.
For the celebrities, I find that they're very pat questions. They're softball questions. What are you doing here? Have you had a personal experience? Can I get you to cry on camera?
Yeah. I think more and more, though, they're answering yes, they've been impacted directly.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and more are forthcoming.
Yeah.
Is there something you can do there, too, for celebrities at events? Cue cards, if
Yeah.
you will, of set of basic AIDS
I
facts,
don't-
if cornered?
Well, AIDS facts, I think, are
Yeah.
is probably good, but, it's not good to have them prepackaged because then you lose, why they really are there, if in fact they care, and I think more and more people do.
You sort of try to coach them on who they're there for, what event, what organization they're there
By
for.
the way, tonight,
Right,
it's,
yeah.
But I do want to talk a little bit about, your question. I think it's a very critical one about how the media deals with people with AIDS. And how the kind of pressure that people with AIDS must experience, being confronted either with, the microphone and the camera, or by somebody like
It's
me
hard
with a
enough for
pen
some
and
people to
paper.
tell their families and
Right.
to be
That's
dragged
right.
out on the 11 o'clock news and say, all right, here goes, answer personal questions.
Well, if they're at an event, then they have sort of made themselves accessible, unless they say, no, I don't want to, no, I'm not feeling well, or please, and then they skirt around the press. But one of the things that I do find with the press is that they expect the person with AIDS to be dying, and therefore to be
Right.
wise, and come up with a pearl of wisdom that transcends, all here to know.
Right,
And to be a
not just
medical
people.
expert.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be a medical expert,
That's
that if you
right.
have this, you somehow, in the first 5 minutes,
That's
your
right.
doctor filled
Right.
you in
That's
on the
right.
entire
Yeah.
history of the disease, that because you have this, you're going to know more than someone else.
Right, and the other thing that I think is very interesting, and I really commend people with AIDS for not, gathering the strength and, punching somebody in the face, is that so many reporters tend to be patronizing.
Yeah.
Oh, you poor victim. We know it's not PC to say victim anymore.
Right,
but that's the
thanks
treatment.
to GLAAD. They say, no, it's AIDS patients, not victims. We will
Right.
not be victimized. They don't understand the concept. They understand the terminology.
But even AIDS patients, most of my friends say, well, I'm not in the hospital right now. I don't feel like a patient.
Well, they don't. Reporters, mainstream reporters, do not get AIDS humor at all.
No.
They don't.
That makes them extremely humorous.
It's very, of course, there's quite the tradition of that, the gallows humor,
Now, does that make it tough then if you have a person with AIDS who's willing to do interviews? But I'm thinking of Steve Peters, the long-term survivor, who's hopelessly cheerful and makes jokes. Does this sometimes make it hard for them to get a spot as opposed to someone who might be more distraught or, oh yes, I'm in a terrible victim mode?
I think so, unless the reporter's willing to then change their route again, because there's a woman who's a client at the center, and the reporter wanted to do the poor mother with a baby, and the woman is very healthy, she's upbeat, she's out there educating, and she would not cry on camera, and the reporter was getting so frustrated. But I think
which
if
is like broadcast news, do the
yeah,
cutaway and all cry.
Yeah.
But the thing about Steve Peters is that there's always the hook, as they say, of the fact that he is not only a long-term survivor, but look at all the diseases that he overcame. I mean, because you were in with Michael Kearns in AIDS, and Jim Pickett's AIDS Us too with Steve. But the other thing is that any time there's somebody who is at an important event, for instance, Steve sat right next to President Clinton at this religious breakfast. And it's my contention, albeit it's only a feeling, that the next day when Luke Sissifag addressed Clinton and started screaming at him, and Clinton just sort of sat there, this is on World AIDS Day, and Clinton scowled a little and showed his concern, and then finally he said, I would rather have that man rage than give up hope. Well, the day before I'd interviewed Steve Peters, and Steve Peters said, the one thing that I want to convey to you, Mr. President, is that people have given up hope. And whether or not you give funding, we need the funding, but more importantly, we need the hope. He's sitting right next to Clinton. I think Clinton got that, and that's how that was conveyed the following day.
He blatantly lifted material from Steve Peters in his full speech. He quoted him repeatedly. He absolutely, lifted massively, and Steve, of course, was thrilled and phoned his mother. But he said, the president's using my act.
Now, see, I just happened to luck into that. I was covering an event for Shanti. I think it was a Bette Midler event or Gypsy screening. And Steve was there. So he said, oh, by the way, this is what has just happened. And I'm scribbling it all down. Of course, the gay press is every other week or whatever. So
but also, here's an example where, although the person with AIDS actually made this wonderful statement, people heard it because President Clinton said it.
That's right.
And in a way, it's a little like there are many people with AIDS with wonderful stories, but because various media celebrities, be they politicians or actors, can go on TV and quote them, they can get coverage.
Right. But, the other thing is that in the recovery, 12-step recovery programs, there's a tradition that talks about spiritual anonymity, that it's more important that the message gets out than who the messenger is. And if the conveyor, happens to be a celebrity or President Clinton or a tirade like Larry Kramer, however the message gets out, that it's the message that's most important.
And I think what's interesting is that you
Magic
and
Johnson, for instance.
We're focused on that. We're like, let's get the message out any way we can. Okay, who do you want? You want this person by 5, we'll get them, or their brother, we'll get you someone. You want a celebrity, we'll make a call. You'll get anyone they want to say it as long as it gets said, whereas they seem to be focused on the messenger. Is it pretty? Can we film it? Is it a visual?
Well, let me ask Nicole. Taking my part as a reporter. But Nicole, how do you? I find I'm sort of like an AP reporter for the gay community, as it were, so I can't cover everything. But how do you find it is getting information out to the Latino community in particular, because that is a big client of yours in the San Gabriel Valley?
Yeah, it's I've been working, I don't speak Spanish and I'm terrible, but anyway, it's difficult because there is resistance in the community, but La Opinion, believe it or not, has been lately very supportive, and I'm not sure if it's because they're finally realizing that this population is tremendously impacted. But there's a reporter there, Josefina Vidal, who's incredible, and she's
been reporting on it for a long time.
And
There's been resistance, but La Piñon's done
and
a
they're
lot
coming
of stories.
along. Yeah, and Josefina is, she's been personally impacted, and she'd tell you that herself. And so she's tuned in on the disease and wants to do things, but again, she meets with resistance. But it's finally, they're finally catching on and open to it. And there's now D'Ambiente, do you know that? A new gay and lesbian and bisexual gay publication that's out now, and that comes out fairly irregularly, but they're good, and we're getting the information out there. So, and that's the first one of its kind, and it's so important, and it's only one, and they're small, and hopefully they're going to be.
Well, then the obvious question, of course, comes up is how large a factor is homophobia in the difficulty in getting AIDS stories out there, would you say?
Big question.
Well, my friend Randy Close, who used to be the board co-chair of the Human Rights Campaign Fund, when he was one of these rich white boys who spent a lot of time on Fire Island, and nothing could touch him. He was never discriminated against. So he said, until he got AIDS. And then all of a sudden, he realized that there was no difference between himself and a young Latino gay person or a young Latino who got AIDS, other than the fact that he could buy better health care. So he spent all this money, he was very rich, he spent all this money on AIDS. And then finally it dawned on him that homophobia was the underlying reason that AIDS spread as it did, and the underlying reason that people look at state, city, county budgets and say, oh, we can check this off. Oh, we don't need AIDS hospices. AHF has been fighting very hard to maintain, funding for their hospices, for God's sake. So I think that homophobia is prevalent, and a lot of people don't even know that they've got it, if you will. However, I think that there's even a greater concern than homophobia, because we're here, we challenge, GLAAD challenges. The greater concern is the fact that AIDS has become assimilated into the culture. We live in a death culture. We walk around, it's not startling to us anymore that people die. It's not startling to us anymore that we can pick up a newspaper and see advertisements for crematoriums. Right. We are not angry. We are not impacted anymore, and neither is the larger culture. So just as gay people have become so assimilated into the culture at large that they don't necessarily see themselves threatened by the radical right, AIDS is a natural part of life.
But you know what, Karen, I still think, though, in the general community as a whole, though, people, they read about it and they read about the deaths, but I don't think they really feel it still, or I see, until they are directly, whether it's a brother, lover,
That's
friend,
right.
sister, whatever.
But it's
that's
kind
when they're
of
going
old,
to take action.
That's
But yeah,
right,
you're right.
because it's old news.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
Those
13,
people,
12,
they're dying,
They're
they're
blasé,
still dying.
right, but
Yeah.
then when it comes,
Oh,
yeah.
AIDS.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things we also want to talk about, some of the
You know what?
books-
This is a time, if you will. You have a picture of Michael Cowan.
Yes.
Michael Cowan, when he did his final interview, final saying goodbye, if you will, to the gay and AIDS community in genre, asked to have Beth Kukuchka shoot his last picture. And there's this incredible, dangerous portrait of him that connects AIDS with the Holocaust.
Do we have that? We do. Okay, we have this up.
Yeah, there it is.
That's Michael
It's
Cowan.
a very, very difficult picture to look at. The genre received a number of calls. How dare you put a picture like this? It shows his catheter. He's lying on a pillow, as you can see, but the way he's lying on that pillow, it suggests the prison of AIDS. He knew that this was a connection between AIDS and the Holocaust. But You know, the only other time that I recall that there's been such a startling picture was in that Colors of
Benetton.
Benetton.
That was
Yeah.
incredible.
That took people so by surprise, and unfortunately, that's sometimes what you need, is
And
you
it,
need
because
some
it was
sort of
from a
shock
bizarre
value.
direction. It was not in a medical paper. It was not in a gay paper. It was not in an AIDS feature. It was in a billboard for a clothing store.
Yeah.
Which is shame.
And this is what
Right.
we have a lot of books that we want to show some of the covers to and talk about. We're talking about the book Borrowed Time and the influence it had beyond its own readership. You were talking about how it affected a longtime companion.
Right, well, Bruce Davison is, he had a friend of his die. He was on, what was that television show, the one where, well, anyway, I've forgotten. But he was the fellow, he was one of the stars of Longtime Companion, and he told me in an interview, Harry Henderson, I think that's what
Yeah.
it is. Harry
Henderson.
well, the fellow who played the tall,
Hairy guy?
hairy
The
guy.
monster.
Yeah.
Bigfoot.
Right, exactly. He actually was a gay man who died of AIDS, the fellow who played that character. So
Peter Michael Hall.
I don't recall, I'm afraid. But Bruce was very impacted by that. And in an interview he did with me, he told me that he, when he prepared for Longtime Companion, that he read Paul Manette's book, Borrowed Time. And it reverberated with him. And you can, that particular performance has lasted way beyond the film. I mean, if you ask anybody about Longtime Companion, they remember that death scene, which was so touching and moving.
We have so much to cover that today on AIDS Vision, we're going to extend, it's going to be the extended play version of AIDS Vision today, because we have other topics to talk about, other books to talk about, other things that are going on with AIDS and the media's approach to it with Nicole Russo and Karen Ocamb. And we will be back.